Okay, all good. We can start.
Okay, good morning to everyone present today for our special talk by Professor Stephen Morey from University of Latrobe, Australia. So I take this opportunity to welcome Professor Stephen Morey, who is not a new friend of ours, rather he was an old friend, not friend, a teacher for many of us when in the days when we first started our entry into linguistics. So I had the opportunity to meet him in one of his talks at CIL Mysore. That is where I started learning a lot about him and particularly about his work in Northeast India, which I will be elaborating in my following talk. So, as we all know, Professor Stephen Morey, he had completed his PhD from Monash University, Australia. Many of us might not be familiar with this university. Thereafter, he joined the Center for Research on Language Diversity in the University of Latrobe, perhaps currently where he's working now. So as far as his knowledge of languages is concerned, he can read and understand Thai. Perhaps he has some understanding of Thai in Northeast India. So his eagerness not only to learn the linguistic aspect of these languages is astonishing, but he has a the spoken languages, which is particular research lies on smaller languages spoken with Northeast India, and perhaps I hope I'm right on that guess. And he has been a frequent visitor of Northeast India. So last night, what I was trying to recollect my past association with Professor Stephen Morey, it came to my mind settler of this region. So my understanding of Assam, except the Barak Valley, is very little and meager. But he has toured several parts of Assam and also Arunachal Pradesh and beyond the borders of Nagaland, bordering Myanmar.
Sir, we can't hear you, sir. Your voice was breaking and now we can't hear you. Dr. Sir.
We're not able to hear you, Hauki. I think he's trying to join.
Mm-hmm.
Will I begin giving the introduction of the speaker as
yeah, Mona Livia, please carry forward.
Yeah, okay. So good morning to all, and today our speaker is Professor Stephen Morey from University of Latrobe, Australia, and like our chairperson, Dr. Pautang Haukip has mentioned, he is a well-known person, and he is also our teacher and a well-trained linguist, and He has an extensive knowledge and done researches on languages of Northeast India. So I would like to continue with what hopefully Pauthang Haokip was trying to say. He was trying to say that Dr. Stephen Morey has done extensive research in the Indo-Myanmar border, and he has done several archiving work, and he has archived traditional songs and rituals and he had a project in 2016 till 2022, and which he is still leading on the Tangsa Wihu song. And he had, apart from the languages of Northeast India, he has also worked on the Aboriginal languages of Victoria, Australia. And presently he's publishing, or he has published, or rather he has a current project on the traditional songs of Aboriginal people in Victoria. And with no further delay, I'd like to request our speaker, Professor Morey, to kindly deliver his talk on practical steps for language documentation in Northeast India. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monali, and thank you also to Pauthang Haokip for his kind words, which unfortunately I couldn't hear in full because of sometimes Zoom is a great miracle, but sometimes things don't work quite 100%. But I was really interested and kind of reminiscing, mentioning the conference of the Foundation for Endangered Languages 15 years ago in October 2006 in Mysore, where Pauthang Haokip and I met up for the first time. It's hard to believe that 15 years have passed, but indeed they have. Now, I'd like to share my screen. That's not the right button for the sharing of screen. Just a moment. This one. And move to this slide to talk now about the topic that I want to speak about today. Now, in some senses, I'm really, as we say in English, preaching to the converted, because all of you people are doing these things already. So when I started researching languages in Northeast India 25 years ago, I certainly at that time did not really meet up with people who were actively trying to document their languages in the way that we are doing this today. But there's been such a big change in that 25 years. And this is important because it's not so easy. Right now, it's not possible at all for somebody like me to be traveling to Northeast India and doing this. And the work, therefore, needs to be spread around. So I thought we'd start by just thinking for a moment about what we should be documenting. So it's quite easy, I suppose, to say we should be documenting languages. Yes, we should. But what does that mean? Should we have a document, a recordings for each language? Well, ideally, yes, we would have that. But how do we even decide what a language is? So I just put up on the screen here the map that the Ethnologue, SIL, Summer Institute of Linguistics, has produced of the languages of Northeast India. Now, whenever anybody produces a map like this, there are going to be issues with it. There are going to be challenges with it. There are going to be questions about it. But in the case, for example, just of the Tangsa languages, which is number 194 on the map, and I've put that arrow so that you can find it. The question is this even one language? So what do we document? So we could document all the ways that people are speaking Tangsa language in a particular village. And if I had done this, it would have been a village called Karangkong, which is in the Lekapani area, in Assam, in Tinsukia district. I could have done that, but if I had done that, I would have completely missed the very significant diversity within that language in inverted commas, because actually there are so many different varieties. And so rather than thinking about documenting languages, maybe what we have to think about is documenting human knowledge and culture. So whatever definition we come up for language, and I don't want to spend any more time talking about what the definition of language might be, save to say that if something's got a name, it is perhaps able to be called a language. But if there is mutual intelligibility, then we might want to say that things are dialects. But even if you have two mutually intelligible dialects that have the speakers of which have different knowledge and even possibly some differences in culture, then don't we want to document both? So my kind of thinking at the moment is we are wanting to document knowledge in whatever form we can do. And we also need, and I have to say this, and I will say this several times today because it takes a long time for this message to get through, that metadata about any recordings we made must be collected. And that metadata will include language names. But if someone has got something worthwhile to record, let's record it. Okay, so language documentation is thought from the point of view of linguists in particular, and I'm talking about linguists outsider linguists like myself, as a way of providing information from which we can do grammatical description, but also do some comparative study and better understand the structure and maybe usage of languages. So what outsider linguists want to do is to record words. And first of all, that would be words for basic concepts. So we could use something like the Icds List, which I'll talk about in a minute, to record things. And then what linguists want to know is how the grammar of the language works, how the meaningful elements of the language are put together. I mean, you've all attended linguistics conferences where we talk about all these different kinds of things. And we get our data for that from things like traditional stories, creation stories, history, songs, etc., but also from everyday conversation. So, and many linguists would say, particularly those who deal with issues like discourse analysis, the way in which people take turns when they are conversing, that actually we'd be better to collect more or everyday conversation and study that than collecting things like historical narratives, stories, creation stories, and particularly songs, because after all, songs are very much not everyday language. So let's just think for a moment about the issue of collecting word lists. So why would we do this? Well, one of the reasons why we might want to do this is to have information about languages that might otherwise be lost. And I'm very familiar with this problem here in Australia, where the tribal, or as we usually call them here, Indigenous languages, many of them are not spoken anymore, and many of them have very few records. So around about maybe 100 kilometers to the southeast of where I live, there's a place called Colac. And the Indigenous language of Colac, I think there are hardly 200 words written down for that language. Almost no information about grammar at all. So it's quite impossible to even contemplate recovering the language since there is almost nothing there. One example of this situation from Assam is with the Moran language, for which the only source that I'm aware of is Major Gurdon's 1903 list, which you can see there. Now, Monali and others will be able to tell us that many of these words, or some of these words at least, perhaps have similarities to other languages of the Borogaro group, such as Dimasa. But even so, most likely, Moran was something different. And just to give you an example of how little information survives for Moran, these are all the words that correspond to English words beginning with A. So usefully, there are words for two different types of adzes, though I don't know, but maybe there are some borrowed words there as well. But there are not words such as aunt, which could refer to mother's sister or father's sister, and they might and probably were different in Moran. There's no word for all. There's no word for afraid. And there's no word for many, many other things. So it's obviously important to document as much as we can. I already touched on this before. This is what linguists want to get out of language documentation and out of research. The phonemic system, an understanding of the sound system of the language. The morphosyntax, what are the meaningful elements of the language and how do they combine? And then information about meaning, about pragmatics, about how context, the effect that context has on language, socio-linguistic details, and of course a dictionary. But a dictionary is probably secondary for linguists unless they are looking for lots and lots of words to do comparison. And linguists also want to see this wide range of texts, particularly things like informal conversation, everyday language. And I didn't even put this on the slide, but linguists would also like us to document things like swearing and even taboo language and talk about all those sorts of things, which I have never dared to ask anybody about in my field work in 25 years, because these are all parts of what humans talk about. So, for example, I have here in my university, we have a PhD student. She's come from Germany and she is doing her whole thesis about swearing in Australian English. This is not, I'm not going to demonstrate any of this for you, but because I wouldn't use these impolite words, especially on a Zoom meeting, but that is a whole area that I doubt is being studied much anywhere in Northeast. But language communities have different priorities for what they want to have documented. And I don't really want to speak on behalf of language communities here because you all know more than I do about this. But language communities, if they want documentation done, it's usually going to be things like traditional stories, songs, ritual, cultural practices. They don't necessarily want to spend hours and hours sitting with people like me working out the phonemic system or working out the tones or that kind of thing. Now, we have to do that in order to write the languages properly, but we've also got to be aware that linguists and communities have different views about what language documentation should do. So one thing that you can do as a start is to collect a basic word list from as many varieties as possible. And one good basic word list for the for our area is the culturally and linguistically meaningful for Southeast Asia or Calm Sea list, which starts off with these body parts. And if we're going to do comparison between different languages, find out which are related to which, then a list like this is very, very helpful. But it isn't very useful for communities because every language community where language is still spoken, everybody knows all of these words. So when we put these words into a dictionary or word list, we're not actually building anything for the community. And it was, in fact, at that meeting of the, I'm fairly sure, at that meeting of the Foundation of Endangered Languages back in Mysore in 2006, 15 years ago, just last week, that I met with some linguists from, community linguists from one of the groups in South America, and they were saying that they are disappointed with what linguists are doing because at the end of all this work, we get a word list that may be aiming to be a dictionary, but is not a dictionary, but it only includes the words that we all know. It does not document the special words that are known only by the elders and might be getting lost. So we have other longer lists like the Icds list. And this is a list that I have used, probably 15 or 20 times over the years, and it collects about 1,400 words. But it again is designed in a cross-linguistic way. So you get, and this is all the words connected with, geography. You get world, earth, dust, ground or soil, dust, mud, sand, mountain. Now, what you see here, you've got two different words for mountain or hill, but actually it will depend very much in what kind of community you are collecting this as to what you get. So if you were, for example, to be collecting language in many parts of Bihar, which is flat and sort of plains area around the Ganga River, then people do not speak about hills very much. And if they do, they maybe have just one or two types. But if you live in mountain areas, which many of you people do, then you might have many more words for hills. And this list is not enough. But there's other issues with these international type lists because some words are not really appropriate. So this list goes on to have sea, ocean, lake, pond or pool, bay or gulf, wave or tide. And many times I've been in Northeast Indian villages trying to collect this, and I can't even explain to people what a tide is. If you haven't seen the sea or the ocean, then you may not know that the water goes out for 6 hours and then comes back in again, and then goes out again and then comes back in again. I know this because the sea is around about 5 minutes walk from where I live, but it's not an ocean sea, it's a bay. It's a very large bay and it is seawater, so it's part of the sea, but it's nevertheless a bay. So I know what bays and tides and gulfs and waves and lagoons and such things are, but there aren't a lot of these in the hilly areas of Northeast India. Well, in fact, there's none. So these words are not going to be necessary. So maybe what we need then is some further kind of tool for collecting words. So Iftihar Rahman, who was then a student at Gauhati University, or had done his MA at Gauhati University, came up with what he called the Stage 2 word list. And I only have the beginnings of it here, but he was starting to list all of the sorts of things that you could ask questions of community members and say, now you tell us. So the names of stars. Now, where I live in a big city in Melbourne in Australia, we hardly ever see the stars. First of all, it's cloudy as often as it's clear here. So on a cloudy night, you don't see stars, but there's too many lights. And although it's not dusty or particularly polluted, because of all the light, you can hardly see the stars. So I don't really know the names of the stars because I don't get to see them very often. But I do remember seeing them very clearly in those villages in Upper Assam, particularly as we got closer and closer to the hill areas on a very fine but cool November night, particularly if we were lucky enough to have an episode of load shedding and all the lights went off. And you can see all the stars. And in some communities, there'll be names for these. But as a linguist, I can't give you the names. This is something we need to get from the community. So we want to ask all of these different kinds of things. And there's a lot more, and maybe we can come up with better types of information. But the other thing that we need to remember when we're talking about collecting words is that two languages will not necessarily have the same words, and they do not necessarily even correspond. Now, the reason why I put this list on here, this is a tribal group in Australia. The language is no longer spoken, but I'm actually going up to meet members of that community next week, and we're going to talk about this. But I want you to look down this list to the words which are father's sister's son, and father's sister's son is listed twice. And the first one has an M at the beginning, and the second one has an F at the beginning. What this means is that a male calls his father's sister's son Neripui, and a female calls her father's sister's son Malanui. Now, when you are collecting information about a language, you might not even think that there are some words which will be different depending on the sex of the speaker. Some people use the word gender, but I'm old-fashioned. So a male in that community calls his father's sister's son Neripui. A female calls the father's sister's son Malanui. So there's a different word. The relationship we might think is the same. In my language, English, this person is simply called nephew. But there are multiple nephews on this list because the father's brother's son and the mother's sister's son and the mother's brother's son are all nephews as well, but there are multiple words for them. But in most parts of the world, that won't change according to the sex of the speaker, but it does here. And part of the issue is that the community members might not even realize, I mean, they know their kinship system, but they might not think to say that you say a different word when you are a male talking about your father's sister's son than when you are a female. I don't know if there are any languages in Northeast India that do this, but if there are, we need to ask the questions in this way. So one way that we might go about deciding what to document is to get community members to make the list of what they think is important. And this is a section of a list that Banwang Losu, some of you may know Banwang Losu has put together for the things that he wants to document in the Wancho villages. So he wants to talk about the Morung system. Now, Morung is not a Wancho word. They call it Pa. And he wants to talk not just about that system. Traditional system of dormitories for youths was a well-defined system to educate and impart training to them about the essential ancient knowledge system of human life and social activities to be performed for the welfare of the community. So just documenting all the possible information about this system would itself be a huge task. Firstly, if there are still surviving examples of these buildings, you'd want to photograph them. You'd want to ask people to talk about how they were constructed. You'd want to get the names for all the parts. Then you'd want to talk about any traditional ceremonies or events that occurred when the young people went into these dormitories. Then you'd want to get some of the older people to reminisce on their life in the dormitories, to talk about the educational system, to talk about the knowledge that's connected with them, maybe the stories that led to the creation of them. One thing leads to another. You could talk about documenting the Morong system, but in the language of Kampwa Nokmu village of Wancho, you could talk about that for a very long time. From the point of view of linguists, though, you might not get a great deal more important information about the structure, grammatical structure of the language. You'll get words, you'll get more words out of it, but maybe the grammatical structure of the language, you don't need the texts about this system, this Morong system, but you do need it to do good documentation. And as you can see, Banwang listed the festivals, and then he started to list other cultural activities such as gun making and weaving, and there were many, many other things that I couldn't fit onto this page. So I promised that I would mention metadata again, and I will, and I'll mention it probably again. Metadata recording is important, but rich metadata gives us more information. So why is metadata important? Okay, so again, I refer back to my research here in Victoria. Now, this is a photograph on the right-hand side of a manuscript of a song. We know that the song is called Gaigip. We know that it was brought from the mountain areas to the northeast of Melbourne down to Melbourne in 1843 by a group of people headed by an old man whose name was Kalakalup. We know that the first 6 parts of the song, the people will display the weapons, the different weapons of the different tribes, and that the 7th one they hold branches of peace. We know that the song has the meaning of bringing peace of different tribes that are meeting together. This much we know. This is context, and we need to collect contextual information about something like this. But the person who recorded this song, who wrote down this song, did not write down the meaning. We have no idea what even one word of this means. So we don't want to have a situation in the documentation that we have where we do not know the meaning. So I will play you now, and I'll check that I've got, yes, share the sound, a tiny example from the late Soipo Pansa singing a Wancho song, just to give you a feeling for it. I'm talking too much and therefore in danger of running out of time. So we'll just listen a moment for this. Okay, ready?
Piu nang mat kok sa sapa kai nong e cham phang nga sa kam da khu di nga nga he u e chu le hang lang dai u he.
So there isn't time to listen to the whole song. I will point out it was recorded in the Kiati Hotel in Dibrugarh, which some of you may have visited, and you can hear in the background some carpenters are banging something, because I cannot recall ever staying in a hotel in Northeast India where someone is not building something. So they're not good places to record because there's so much noise in the background. So what information do we collect about this song? We say who. So the late Soipo Pansa. Where? Kiati Hotel, Dibrugarh. When? January 2017, I think. How would refer to the H5 Zoom recorder and whatever microphone. That's important, and we should record that information. But the what, we could simply say children's song. But if possible, we could get the name of the song, maybe a transcription of the song, maybe a translation, and other contextual information like who can sing it. Maybe there are some songs that not everyone can sing. When is it to be sung? Maybe there are some songs that are only sung sometimes and not at other times. Is it accompanied by dance and musical instruments? Now, I shouldn't need to spend too much time on this, but what we did is we sat and recorded the discussion of Soipo and also Banwang Losu explaining the meaning word by word, and then wrote it down. So Banwang has created his own script, which you see at the top, and then underneath that, a simple romanization without marking tones and not really phonemic, but readable, and then a translation. But even this translation is not sufficient, because if we are losing the language, I don't believe we can answer these 4 questions from this information. We can't answer the question of which is the word for sickle. We can't answer the question of whether a small sickle is 1 word or 2. We can't answer the question of how the language conveys please, or which is the word for me, if we do not have a morpheme by morpheme gloss of the kind that we are all doing. Now, of course, one of the problems with this is that this is very, very time consuming. And if you do this level of analysis of rich metadata, as you could call it, for every text, then you won't be able to record many. So we're going to have to record some things for which we don't have this level of information, but we can still have some. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples of how I have observed this being done and then got the idea to do it myself. So to begin, we look at a manuscript of Mahorsaka. Now, if anybody here is Theravada Buddhist, then you will know about the 10 great stories of the previous lives of the Buddha. And you will know that one of those is Mahorsaka, which is the story of Buddha's wisdom. And this has been translated into Thai language and written down as manuscripts in multiple versions. And this is a version dated 1821, because at the end of the manuscript, they always write this manuscript was copied by such and such on this date in this place. Of course, you do not copy a manuscript like this in one day, but they write the date that they finished it. It has at the top the Namo Tassa, which is an introduction to all such Buddhist manuscripts written in Burmese, and then the Thai script underneath it. And if you can see the Thai script looks very different from the Burmese. It's a beautiful manuscript, not in perfect condition, but we have good photos of it. Now, it turns out that in September 2003, Mr. Ong Cham, who is the sort of lay preacher, if you like, so he's not a monk, but he is the leader of ceremonies in the village. The village is called Borpatar. It's actually in Karbi Anglong district. Now, previously, I could have mentioned Borpatar because the old Borpatar is on the Karbi Anglong side of the river, but a new town was constructed when the railway was put through on the Golagat side of the river. That's New Borpatar, and that's where people from this village go to purchase things that they can't buy locally. It's not very far away. In previous years, of course, I could have mentioned Borpatar in Golagat district, and this wouldn't mean anything to you, but you do all know now about Borpatar in Golagat district because Lovelina Borgohain, who won a medal at the Olympic Games, comes from there. And so anyway, this is very close to where she comes from. Now, Ong Cham, what he did, so during certain ceremonies in this community, they will read the manuscripts. But what Ong Cham did is not just read it, because the manuscript is almost sung, but it is also very old and formalized language. So he reads it and then explains it. Now I'm going to play a little bit of this so you can hear it. You'll hear the difference between the formal reading and the explanation. We won't play it all.
Yam nan along pra phẳng khung nữ tiền xa ma khâu tong mun nang giọt phá su mana devi chân sen tiêu hình sẽ mà dân cháu khôn nó khăm phan hắn nan mục phây lung xí ăn hương nơ mưng mân xí chính xí quang phây hương ăn vẫn nó pra along ma khâu tong ti nang devi su mana tăng.
So you can hear that he sings it, intones it, and that is, there will be many people in the community who understand that, but there'll be a lot of young people who can't interpret that. And then he re-speaks it in everyday language. What he was saying, and it is a pleasure for me to listen again to him speaking. What he is saying is that at that time, the emperor was sleeping and dreaming, and he saw a collection of fires in two flames. And these fires were predicting the birth of the person who is going to go on to become the Mahorsaka. And this is, I had already done a translation of this, so I put this in at least to the very first part that he sings. But the point is that if you just go back and have a look at that, I don't know if you can see how huge this book is, but the orange wrapping, above that you can see how the paper, this is relatively a modern book, is sort of wrapped around, and it's thick, it's hundreds of pages long. I actually have a copy of Mahorsaka. It's in my office at the university, so I can't show it to you right now. It's enormous. It would take me weeks just to type it all out, if I could ever do that. And so the task of kind of recording these old manuscripts and understanding the meaning is a huge one. But I got from him the idea that we could do something similar with traditional songs. But what we did here, and so I'm going to play you a small segment, and this goes back a few years as well. And the song was sung by the man on the right, whose name is Gap Kim. But the man in the middle is going to explain the meaning. And I'm going to play back the song line by line. So I open it in a program like Audacity, something that shows the waveforms. And you can tell then when the line finishes, because all the black noise of the waveform stops, and you just play that much. So you can have a listen to how this was done. On now. So we are starting from the third section of the Vihu song, which is 31st of October 2012. Starting from the third section of the Vihu, October 31st, 2012. That's recording number 04. So note there that I started the recording by giving some metadata. This is also good practice. I don't always remember to do it, but saying at the beginning of the recording, you know, when it is and what it's about, in case you later don't know. I have recordings which, you know, I have forgotten to do this for, and I don't to this day know what they are. But now listen to what we do. It's on now. Sorry to listen. So we are starting from the third section of the Vihu, October 31st, 2012. That's recording number 04. Okay, so even if that's not a translation that Mr. Chongkam is doing there, he's explaining the meaning to Renman, who is sitting next to him. And the hope would be that Renman understands enough of that, that later when we have the time to write down and translate the whole song, we have the information that we need. So what I'm suggesting is that one way that might save time for collecting information about these kinds of traditional songs is to immediately play them back to the singer line by line or section by section and get them to explain whatever it is they want to explain about it, because that will help to enrich our knowledge of it. Part of the issue here is that we can't always know that a recording that we made today will be able to be analysed in 20 years' time, although we hope that that is still going to be true in most of the languages of Northeast India. And it is more important to make the recording just in case the recording that you can make today can't be made in the future, because no one has that knowledge in the future. So I wanted to give you an example now of a recording that I made a long time ago and didn't do anything about for a long time. So we were discussing traditional songs on the morning of 24th December 2008 that had been rehearsed the previous night and which we had videoed. This is with my colleague Jürgen Schöpf, musicologist. While we were doing this discussion, we were told that Pulim, who's the elder, would need to leave and prepare for killing a buffalo for the purpose of eating at the Christmas feast. These people have now become Christians, and 24th of December is the day before their Christmas celebration. But they decided, since we were there with good cameras, that they would get dressed in their traditional gear and demonstrate the way that in traditional time the buffalo would be sacrificed, tied at the foot of the steps leading into the house, and also demonstrate the song that would be sung along with it. So I'll give you just a small, so you can see the buffalo there. This is after the buffalo has been killed, and just gives you a little bit of the song. Okay, so that's just a very small section of the song. A rather sort of rather not exactly rough, but we've not attempted to put at this stage of this transcription, I've been subsequently doing this work, put in the tones, the spoken tones of the language, because the tones don't really so much get represented when people sing, although perhaps they do. But you can see what I have done here is noted some things as what I've called song particle. And the ones which are in boldface, these are the ones that other people join in to sing along with. So he sings, ara di long ma le, and everybody joins in with that le. And then kim yua tancho a yo, that second, the a, which is in the middle of the second line, people join in there. So there is a sort of definite poetic structure for where you join in these different lines. Now, this recording, as I say, was done in 2008. And the following year, in 2009, we recorded the prayer, which would have been said at the same time. So these two events were separated. But it's only in 2021 that we've actually got round to trying to translate it. So, and the process that and I've done this without standing up from the couch on which I'm sitting now. Well, not exactly, because sometimes I sit outside in my back garden when the weather is nice to do my work. So uploading the video of the buffalo sacrifice to YouTube and sending the link to the language consultant Kitong, and he then sent me back in Facebook Messenger his first draft translation, his first draft transcription and translation. And then we set up Facebook Messenger chat, sharing the screen. So he's only watching on his mobile phone, but what I do is I make the size of the screen as the size of my document as big as possible so he can see it. And then we discuss the spelling and discuss the translation. And we also do clarification by chat. So this is something that I have been doing a lot of recently. And this particular discussion came up because there are two different words for guest in the song, Vanro and Getse. And one of my colleagues, who is a musicologist, but we are hoping to write a joint article with Kitong and the musicologist and me about this buffalo sacrifice song. And my colleague said, well, there are two different words for guests. Do they mean the same thing? And so we had this discussion, as you can see here, by Facebook Messenger. So this was really all that I wanted to say today, and I hope it's helpful and within time to give an idea of the kinds of things that can be done for documentation, record anything and with anything. Some of you are my Facebook friends, and you know that it was my birthday on Sunday, and I put up a Facebook post with a recording of a concert performance that I was involved in more than 30 years ago. And that was recorded on a camera at the time, but the picture is nowhere near as good as a picture you can get out of any of your mobile phones. So today, although the mobile phone does not necessarily produce the best sound, even recording something with a mobile phone is better than not recording it at all. But I'll say one more thing about video recording. What you did see from both of the recordings that I showed you is that we move the camera as little as possible. The only reason to move the camera is if something starts happening somewhere else that you need to film. Sometimes it's a good idea to slowly zoom in and zoom out. But most of the time, this was good advice given to me by a friend of mine who wasn't a linguist, but who had experience in making video. Set up the camera and let the people in the camera tell the story. Don't do too much zooming in and out, because when you see the video that's zooming in and out all the time, I find you miss things. The story is being told by the people, by the dancing, by the way they sit and sing, by whatever they do. You do not need to keep moving the camera. All right, I think I will stop there. And if there is some time for discussion, Monali, that would be nice.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful talk on practical steps for language documentation in Northeast India. It was very enriching and quite an enlightening one for all of us, and also for all the beginner linguists present here today. And I'm sure there will be pretty lot of questions coming from the participants. We have time for discussion, so participants can unmute yourselves and ask questions, or you can leave a question in the chat box. You can also raise your hands if you want to take turns in asking questions. So the room is open for discussion.
If no questions are coming, just for a moment, can I ask, has anybody tried doing this, playing back in sections, something like a song, and recording the speakers, the singers, explaining the meaning? Has anyone done something like that?
No, as far as my experience of recording some of the traditional songs, I did not do that. Perhaps had I attended your recording, I would have done that. So
next time.
I'll be more careful that explanation. But for some stories, which are quite difficult, we ask the native speaker to translate them in the language they are convenient, for example, in Hindi or something like that. So that was my experience of recording songs and stories from Barak Valley. So coming without taking another turn for a question, let me just continue with a question. So according to your experience, sir, how much of differences do you find between analyzing a song or analyzing a ritual from the normal, what you call the analysis of language that we do through text collection or elicitation? So
yeah,
something. Yeah.
Good question. No, good question. So I'm not sure that I've ever done enough work on any language to be able to answer the question of whether of how much difference there is between informal spoken language, between the language of traditional stories, between the language of ritual, and perhaps the language of songs. Now, I'd probably be able to answer this question better for the Thai language than for any of the others right now, because I did record back in my PhD some spoken, some kind of informal conversations. And the thing about, I probably know even better about that in Trung, but the thing is that Trung doesn't really have very many songs or this kind of rituals. So, but in the Thai languages, the thing about spoken conversation is that very frequently people don't get to the end of the sentence before they either get interrupted or they forget and change the topic. Whereas in narratives, you're much more likely to get longer, complete bits of text. So I imagine that in many languages, you might get shorter sections if it is kind of informal conversation, and longer ones if you are recording stories. In terms of the kind of ritual type languages, if we compare the language of that manuscript that was being sung or the language of the buffalo sacrifice song, these are very different from spoken language. So the buffalo sacrifice song and the manuscript in some cases will have a limit to the number of syllables per line. There are often rhyming or other poetic features that are required, and these are not going to occur in spoken language. But there are likely to be languages where the spoken language and the song language are not so different, or maybe the song language varies from one style to another. This will vary from one community to another, I expect. But in order to really answer that question really deeply, you probably have to spend almost a lifetime just working on one language. And maybe if I had just remained at Borpatar and done all my research there for the last 25 years, I could answer all those questions in relation to Dayaiton, but then there wouldn't be anything on all the others. So it's a difficult thing to say. And that's why it's so good to see so many of you here doing all this work on your own languages.
Thank you, Dr. Pautang Haokip, for your question. And are there any more questions or any comments or anything anybody wants to share? Please unmute yourselves. Uncle Musil?
Yes. It is a very much enlightening talk. For that recording of songs, that I have not done anything, line by line analysis of the songs, but we have recorded many songs. Bijen and I together recorded many Wipo songs, and we did the transcription also, but not yet done line by line analysis. And for my first project of the Firebird project, I have done something similar to what is, what has been discussed by Professor Morey. We have one epic, verses, which contains more than 700 verses. That we have recorded that, and we do analysis by not line by line, but portion by portion. We did that, and today Professor has highlighted that. I feel very much, I have a feeling that I will redo the epic translation or analysis to analyze it line by line. That would be very helpful. That will be very helpful for the younger generation. I just want to convey that. Thank you.
Well, that's going to be a wonderful achievement, because if I can just remind you again, we don't want to land in the situation that this song is in. No, sorry, I accidentally failed to share the right slide. That this song is in, for which we do not have any information about the meaning. Okay, so this was written down in 1844, so there was no sound recording then. But it's a good job he has done in writing the sounds as best he could. This is useful. But without any meaning, we have lost a lot of information about that. So, but how to do this? So everybody in this room has got a laptop, right? So you can, and now this is much, much easier than it was 20 years ago. Transferring the recording into the laptop, you can play it back using a tool like Audacity, which will show, and I should have put a slide of this up. But when you put a recording into Audacity, you can see when there is a break in the singing, and therefore you play the section up to the next break because the wave form is showing itself. It would take me 2 minutes to open it up, so I won't do that now. But record the discussion of the meaning when you do this with the singer. The more, like, there is no, in the future, in 50 years' time, if you have got lots and lots more recordings of your language, the people who are researching it in 50 years' time will not be angry with you for having too many. They might be if you have too few. They will get, of course, exhausted at having to listen to them all, but they will be happy that there are too many.
Thank you, Uncle Musil, for your question. Any more questions or comments?
Okay, Monali, since nobody is coming in, I have another question for Professor Morey. So most of the archiving that we do for Northeastern languages are mere recordings of audio and video without the sort of metadata that are available for a driver of the language in case a language dies. So is it sufficient to have only audio, video recordings of the rich traditions and then without rich metadata? This is one. Second is quite personal. So how would one ensure that one's work on these ritualistic songs or whatever or other ritualistic tradition get published? So what should be the right approach? Because I was hesitant to start this writing because it is new. It is a new field, and I see only you are engaged deeply in this work.
Two very interesting questions. So the answer to the first question about metadata is that any recording is better than no recording. So, and if you saw before that manuscript of that song from Victoria that has no meaning attached to it, it is better to have that than not to have it. But it would have been much better if we also knew what it means. So, and again, if I can remind you, and I think I might reshare the screen to just to remind people about this, because I find that the story of metadata is one which needs to be told many times. Where is it? No, it comes after this. Just have to remember where I got that information. Yes. So some of the metadata is very easy to record. Who is singing on it or who is speaking, unless there is a very large number of people, in which case it can be time consuming to collect it. The who, where, when, and how are not complicated. But the what, this is the one which is difficult. So the only metadata we have for the song here is that it's the only what that we have is that its name is Gagip, and that is given at the top there. So that is something. At least we have the name of it. But if you can, so one of the things that I would often do, even when I am not recording the explanation of a song, I will at least get the sort of line by line explaining, because that is quite time consuming, but I will at least get the singer to maybe tell the story of the song. So even if you don't go back and play it line by line, because it is not convenient to do so, after you record the song, you could then ask the singer to tell me what this song means and when you would sing it, and ask on recording in whichever language you are speaking with that person. Ask them, how did they learn it? When did it used to be sung? All this kind of contextual information. So there's really no limit to what is useful information to collect. The more that you collect, the better it will be. Now, as for publication, well, I think this is something this is a good audience for me to talk to about this, because every one of us in academic field, we need to publish our data for two reasons. In the long term, the most important reason is so that the information that we have collected and the knowledge that we have acquired is shared with everyone else. And, if you think back to what we know about the languages of Northeast India from former times, some of those Britishers who wrote things down in the Journal of the Asiatic Society in Calcutta in the 1800s, they did a great service by doing that. So you want to publish things so that the information gets out. But we also have the need that we all have to publish things in order for the sake of our own career, because in academia, if you do not publish, you do not stay, particularly in my country, you have to keep doing it. So we have to look then at places where things like this can be published. Now, we do not have, as far as I know, a special journal yet for language of rituals or song language in the Northeast Indian region. But, for example, the former Northeast Indian linguistics, the Niels volumes, which are now part of Himalayan linguistics and called Languages and Peoples of the Eastern Himalayan region, and some of you I know about this, we can certainly accept a paper that meets the requirements, the current requirements of international standard publication. We can accept papers in that about this kind of topic because it is about language. But I think that this is an area that is under-researched in Northeast India, this sort of songs and particularly sort of the more ritual language. Not that many people are really doing big projects on this at the moment. And I hope there will be more in the future, because this kind of language is probably even more endangered than some of the spoken languages. Now, with the Vihu song, which I first recorded in Karangpong village in December 2007, it happened like this. For 6 days, we collected the word list from that Icds list. All those words, recorded them and tried to start writing them down in some kind of phonemic system, not exactly very scientific. And then on the 7th day, we took rest. Those of you who are Christian, you will understand the reference here, which was itself a Sunday. And it turned out that on that day, some visitors came to the house, and the owner of the house, Lukam Tonglum, or Lukyam Cholim in his own language, he welcomed the visitors by singing a song. They were not much interested in the song, but I was amazed. This is the first time anyone sang me a song without me asking them to do it. And that night we recorded these songs. Now that was probably the first time that a Vihu song was recorded anywhere. I've no evidence of any recording older than that, and that's December 2007. So these traditions, and I don't know in how many other languages and villages, people have not yet got round to recording these. So this is important. I've talked too long, I think I should stop.
Thank you, Bautang Haokip, for your questions, for the questions on it. And thank you so much, Sir Stephen Morey, for such a wonderful discussion that you have brought in for the questions. And it is always such a pleasure to listen to you. And we have to come to the end of the session now, as we're running short of time. So I would like to thank you once again for giving time and become part of the program today. And I'd like to request Dr. Bijan to kindly give vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Monali, for the opportunity. So I would like to thank Professor Stephen Morey for accepting our invitation for this presentation. Thank you very much, sir. You have made your time out of your busy schedule, and we learn a lot from your today's talk as well, that from practical steps that we have to do when we go for the language documentation, what should be done, what should be done. And all the participants, we are very appreciated for giving your time, because this is office hour time in India right now. And sir, we have
Bijan, I think we're not able to hear you.
I am unable to hear him, but I got most of the message. So thank you. And yes, well, it is evening time here. So
yeah, everyone wants to attend your program, your talk, but because of this collision in the office timing, so
yes,
that is the problem.
Yes, it is, because when it becomes evening time in India, it becomes midnight here, and this is not somehow easy for me. So yeah, that is the issue. Anyway, I will say farewell because I know you have to move on, and we'll meet again for sure.
Thank you so much, Sir Morey, once again, and thank you to all the participants present here. Thank you, Dr. Bijan, for giving your vote of thanks, and thank you, Dr. Pautong Hauki, for chairing the session. We will meet once again next week, and we will announce the forthcoming talks as well very soon in the Facebook page. Thank you once again. Have a good day.